Welcome to Talk Treatises.
Hey, it is great to be here.
So today, we're actually doing something a little bit different for this deep dive.
Yeah, shifting gears a bit.
Right. Usually when we sit down to talk about political philosophy or, these classic texts, we tend to drift toward the utopian side of things.
Oh, absolutely. The perfect republic, the ideal state.
Exactly. How things should be if everyone just behaved perfectly and followed all the rules.
Which, spoiler alert, they never do.
No, they definitely don't. But today, we are looking at something completely different. We're looking at what is essentially the manual for when the world is completely on fire.
Yeah, it's the emergency brake for civilization, really.
That is a perfect way to put it. We're analyzing a classic work of political philosophy that was written when the author felt like the entire moral fabric of Europe was just dissolving right in front of him.
A very dark time.
Incredibly dark. The text is called The Rights of War and Peace. Or, if you want to be formal about it, the Latin title is De Jure Belli ac Pacis.
Written by Hugo Grotius.
Right. Originally published in 1625.
And this is a monumental text. I mean, monumental is really the only word for it because this is not light reading.
No, definitely not beach material.
No, it's dense. It's incredibly intricate. But it's also arguably the most important book ever written regarding why countries don't just, completely annihilate each other at the slightest provocation.
It's the rule book for the apocalypse.
Uh-huh.
The mission of this text, despite not being like artistic literature, was to create a system of principles to light the way for sovereigns in the paths of peace. It's a universal classic.
It really is a masterpiece of its genre.
But before we get into the actual legal arguments, and there are some incredibly dense legal arguments we're going to get into, I want to set the scene for you because 1625, this was not a great time to be alive in Europe.
That is a massive understatement. To really understand Grotius and to understand the sheer urgency of this book, you have to understand the absolute nightmare that he was living through.
The 30 Years' War.
Exactly. The 30 Years' War was raging. And I want to be clear here. This wasn't war like we see it discussed on the news today. With precision strikes and lawyers sitting in a situation room debating rules of engagement.
Right on that.
This was total unmitigated chaos. The world before this book was a chaos of lawless and unreasoning strife. War was just the familiar phenomenon. Peace was actually a difficult conception for people to even grasp.
Give us some of the sensory details. Like, what are we actually looking at on the ground?
You're looking at armies that are essentially just roving bands of locusts. They aren't getting paid regularly by their sovereigns, so they pay themselves by pillaging.
Just taking whatever they want.
Whatever they want. Grotius actually describes this in the preface of the text. He says he saw a license for fighting throughout Christendom that would make even barbarians blush.
Wow.
Yeah. No reverence for divine law, no reverence for human law, just brutal fierceness.
So it's basically Mad Max.
It is Mad Max, just in 17th century garments, burning villages, slaughtering civilians, torture. It genuinely felt like the end of the world.
And right in the middle of this slaughterhouse, you have Grotius.
Right in the middle of it.
Right.
And he looks at all this chaos, this absolute devastation, and he essentially says, wait, there has to be a floor.
A floor?
Yeah, a baseline of behavior that even bitter enemies share.
Which, that seems like a totally hopeless task, doesn't it? If some mercenary is charging at you with a pike, he doesn't care about your philosophy. He doesn't care about your baseline.
He doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. But the king or the general who sent him, they might. And that is the true mission of this book. It wasn't written for the soldier bleeding in the trench. It was written for the sovereign.
The decision makers.
Exactly. It was an attempt to use sheer logic to bind the hands of kings.
So he's essentially trying to invent international law from scratch.
Effectively, yes. He's building the social contract, but he's not doing it between people within a single country. He is building it between nations. He wanted to prove that even in the silence of arms, the laws are not actually silent.
Now, usually, the kind of guys who write 900-page legal textbooks are, let's be honest, they're often perceived as these dusty academics locked away in ivory towers.
Very dry, very boring.
Right, but Grotius. This guy has an origin story that honestly sounds like a Hollywood heist movie.
It really does. It's fascinating. He wasn't just some detached scholar. He was a major player. First of all, he was a prodigy. literally a boy of genius.
How smart are we talking here?
Well, he was writing Latin verses at 9 years old.
9.
Yeah. And he entered Leiden University at 12.
12 years old. I think I was still trying to figure out how to beat the water temple in Zelda at 12.
Right. He was on another level, just remarkably gifted. But as is often the case, his intellect got him into a lot of trouble.
How so?
He became deeply involved in the political and religious conflicts of the Dutch Republic. Specifically, there was this massive dispute between two factions, the Remonstrants and the anti-Remonstrants.
Okay, I have to admit, that sounds like a very nerdy gang war.
It sounds nerdy, but it was deadly serious. It was fundamentally about predestination, the true nature of faith, and, critically, the power of the state over the church.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. And Grotius picked the losing side. He sided with the Remonstrants. The leader of his faction, a man named Oldenbarnevelt, was actually beheaded.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Grotius got what you could call lucky. He was sentenced to imprisonment for life.
Life imprisonment.
In the fortress of Lovestein.
Which usually, that tends to end the career of a political philosopher.
You would certainly think so.
Yeah.
But this is exactly where the story gets cinematic. So he's in this fortress, but he was allowed to have books brought to him in his cell because he's a scholar.
Okay.
And these books were carried in and out in this large, very heavy wooden chest. Now, at first, the guards would meticulously check the chest every single time.
Right, to make sure he wasn't smuggling anything in or out.
Exactly. Files, ropes, weapons, secret letters, standard prison security.
Makes sense.
But Grotius was a voracious reader. I mean, he was tearing through these books. So this heavy chest was coming and going constantly, always full of these massive theology and law books.
And let me guess, the guards get lazy.
Over time, the guards got incredibly tired of checking it. They just assumed, oh, it's just the book box again.
Complacency, the enemy of security everywhere.
Precisely. Now, enter Grotius's wife, Marie.
Okay.
She is the real mastermind of this whole operation. She realizes that the guards aren't checking the box anymore.
Oh my God.
So she looks at this chest, she looks at her husband, and she basically says, get in.
He got in the box.
He got in the box. And you have to realize, Grotius wasn't a small man. He had to curl himself up completely tight in this very confined space.
That sounds terrifying.
They had to bore a few small air holes in it just so he wouldn't suffocate while he was in there.
I'm just imagining the anxiety of that. You're in a dark box, upside down, basically, knees against your chest. You can feel yourself being lifted up by the very soldiers keeping you captive. You have absolutely no idea if they're going to decide to open it today.
It's pure suspense. And the soldiers did come to collect it. They even remarked on how incredibly heavy it was that day.
Oh, no.
One of them actually joked. He said, there must be an Arminian hiding in it. Meaning a type of religious scholar, which was the faction Grotius belonged to.
A joke that was literally the absolute truth.
Literally the truth. And Marie, who was standing right there, cool as a cucumber, just played it off perfectly.
That has nerves of steel.
Completely. So they carry him out of the fortress, load this chest onto a boat, and once they were safely clear of the area, he popped out.
Unbelievable.
He escaped to Paris, and it was there, in exile, that he finally wrote The Rights of War and Peace.
That is just incredible context. I mean, the foundational text of international law, the book that tells nations how they have to behave, was written by a guy who literally mailed himself to freedom in a book chest.
It really puts things into perspective.
It does. It really matters, doesn't it? Because he wasn't writing about justice from this position of safety and comfort.
No, he was a refugee.
He was a refugee who had lost everything, which brings us perfectly to his motivation. Grotius wasn't some visionary pacifist in the modern sense of the word.
Oh, not at all. He didn't think war could just magically vanish. He didn't think we could all just hold hands and agree to get along. He was a hardcore realist.
Right.
He looked at the brutal fierceness of his time, and he wanted to determine exactly when, how, and by who war could be justly conducted.
So he's not saying end all war. He's saying, let's regulate the chaos.
Exactly. Don't pretend the chaos didn't exist. Manage it.
Okay, let's actually unpack this masterpiece. The text itself is divided into 3 books, but the arguments really flow through a few massive overarching themes. And the first one is really the bedrock of everything else in the text. It's part 1 of our deep dive today, the foundations of law.
This is where it all starts.
Grotius is trying to separate this concept of right, or jus in Latin, from just brute force.
Correct. And to do that, to make that separation, he has to define exactly where law comes from in the first place.
Right.
And this is where he makes a really bold, honestly, almost revolutionary move for his time. He introduces this profound reliance on natural law.
Now, we hear that term a lot today, natural law. But what does Grotius actually mean by it in the context of 1625? Because back then, wasn't the ultimate source of authority just God? Like, God says don't kill, so don't kill. End of debate.
For the vast majority of people, yes, absolutely. But Grotius does something incredibly daring here. He basically splits the atom of moral philosophy.
Okay.
He argues that natural law is so immutable, so unchangeable, that, and this is a direct concept from his work, even God himself cannot change it.
Oh, hold on. He is explicitly saying that God is limited.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very fast track to being burned at the stake in the 17th century.
It was incredibly risky. But he backs it up by using the analogy of mathematics.
How so?
He says, look, just as God cannot make 2 + 2 not equal 4, God cannot make that which is intrinsically evil not be evil.
Ah, I see.
Natural law isn't just an arbitrary divine command that could change tomorrow. It's a structural reality of the universe.
So baked into the code of existence.
Exactly.
Meaning that even if there were no religious revelation whatsoever, this law would still exist.
Grotius absolutely believes so, and he uses a very famous phrase in Latin to explain this, etiam si duramus, which translates to, even if we were to grant.
Grant what?
Even if we were to grant that God did not exist or took no interest in human affairs, these laws would still be valid.
Wow. That is the exact pivot point to secular law, isn't it?
It is the absolute foundation of it. He argues that this law is based squarely on the social nature of man.
A social nature?
Yes. Humans are not just solitary, isolated animals. We have a fundamental, built-in need for a peaceful society. Therefore, logically, anything that destroys that society is wrong by nature.
Because it goes against our basic function.
Exactly. It's self-evident.
I'm like, I don't need a specific religious commandment to tell me that, say, punching you in the face right now destroys our ability to have a productive conversation.
Right.
It's just an objective fact of our social interaction. It breaks the system.
Perfectly said. Now, he distinguishes this core natural law from 2 other kinds of law, and this is an important framework to grasp.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Think of natural law as the operating system of humanity. It comes pre-installed on the hardware. It's engraven on the heart.
Pre-installed, I like that.
Then, layered on top of that, there is what he calls the voluntary law of nations.
Which is what exactly?
Those are the rules that are essentially agreed upon by civilized nations. The customs. Things like not poisoning wells or the protocols for how we treat foreign ambassadors.
So, if natural law is the operating system, the voluntary law of nations is like the user agreement.
That's a great analogy. It's the terms and conditions we all agreed on to make living next to each other bearable.
Okay. And the third kind of law.
Finally, there is divine law. These are the specific, explicit commands from God found in Scripture. And these might actually be stricter than natural law, for instance, specific rules about divorce or religious rituals.
Okay, so natural law really is the baseline. It applies to everyone equally. Christians, Muslims, atheists, everyone.
Yes. And you have to remember why that universality was so crucial for Grotius.
Because of the religious war.
Exactly. The wars he was watching tear Europe apart were between different religious factions. If you try to base international law on the Bible, the Catholics and the Protestants are just going to argue endlessly over the translation while they continue to kill each other.
Right. There's no neutral arbiter.
But if you base the law on nature, on the fundamental social need for survival, you suddenly have common ground.
That is brilliant. It bypasses the theological debate entirely. It does.
So upon this secular, rational foundation of natural law, Grotius builds his entire theory of war, which leads us to part 2 of our deep dive, ad bellum.
The right to go to war.
Right. And this really is the million-dollar question for him. If we admit that human society absolutely needs peace to function, how can we ever justify going to war?
Grotius starts by getting very clear on definitions. He defines war not just as the physical action of fighting, but as this state of contending parties.
The state of contending. So it's a legal status, not just bullets flying.
Yes. And he is incredibly strict about what makes that state of war just. He limits just causes to 3 main categories.
Only 3.
Only 3. Defense, recovery of property, and punishment.
Okay, let's go through those. Defense seems pretty obvious. Someone attacks me, I can fight back.
Right. Defense of life and limb is the most primal right. You don't have to just stand there and let someone kill you.
Makes sense. And recovery of property. Also relatively straightforward in his view. If a neighboring nation violently seizes your territory or your trade ships or your assets, you have a natural right to use force to take them back.
It's just restoring the balance.
Exactly. But the third one, a punishment, is really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds a bit broad.
It is. He argues that nations can actually inflict penalties for crimes, even if those crimes aren't directly against them.
Wait, really? Like being the world police?
Sort of. If
Yeah.
the crimes are heinous enough against nature itself, against that fundamental natural law, then any sovereign has the right to step in and punish the offender to maintain the global order.
That's a heavy responsibility.
It is. But here's where it gets really interesting to me, and where I think Grotius pushes back super hard against a lot of modern political thinking.
Oh, about preemptive strikes.
Yes. He spends a lot of time talking about fear. In history, and definitely even today, we hear a ton of justification based on preemptive strikes.
Right, the whole argument of they're building up a massive army, they're getting too strong, we have to hit them right now before they hit us.
Exactly.
What does Grotius say about that logic?
He rejects it entirely, completely throws it out. He calls it the preemptive strike fallacy.
Really?
Yes. Grotius argues that you cannot kill someone or go to war with an entire nation simply because you fear that they might hurt you at some point later.
Man, that is a really hard line to draw.
It's very strict.
Because think about it. If I see my neighbor buying a massive sword and he's standing in his yard sharpening it while staring directly at my house, do I really have to just wait for him to actually swing it at my head?
According to Grotius, yes.
Wow.
Or at the very least, the danger must be immediate and imminent. It can't be hypothetical. Fear of a neighbor's power growing like a neighboring state, getting economically or militarily strong, is absolutely not a just cause for war.
Because it hasn't happened yet.
Exactly. He says that the uncertainty of the future does not give you the right to inflict a certain evil in the present.
But isn't that a little naive? I mean, in the real world, if you wait for the sword to swing, you might die.
Grotius would say that is simply the price of justice.
The price of justice.
Yes, because if you allow fear to be a valid legal justification, then there is absolutely no limit to war.
Because everyone fears everyone.
Right. The weak fear the strong fear the weak, combining against them.
Yeah.
It just becomes the war of all against all. He wants to stop the chaos, remember.
Yeah.
To do that, you have to artificially raise the bar for starting a fight. He's essentially saying, if you strike out of fear, you actually become the very aggressor you were afraid of.
You become the villain in your attempt to stay safe.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have the 3 valid reasons to start a war. But Grotius also spends a massive amount of time on what actually causes these conflicts to spark in the first place.
Yes, the root causes.
And a huge one is just stuff, property, who owns what and why. Which brings us to part 3, property, the sea, and necessity.
This is a great section.
Grotius has a very specific foundational view on how property even came to be.
He does. He uses this beautiful analogy borrowed from Cicero. He says that originally, at the dawn of humanity, the world was a common stock.
Like a giant buffet where everyone can just take what they want.
Kind of, or think of it like a public theater.
Okay, a theater.
The seats in a theater are common to absolutely everyone when the doors open. But once you walk in and sit down in a specific seat, that seat is yours for the duration of the show.
You're occupying it.
Right. Grotius argues that private property arose from industry and the basic human need for stability. You work a piece of land, you build a house on it, you are sitting in the seat, and therefore it legitimately becomes yours.
Okay, that makes logical sense. But there is a massive exception to this rule in the text.
A huge one, the ocean.
Right. The sea.
Yes, and this is one of his most famous legal arguments, the principle of the freedom of the seas. Grotius argues forcibly that the sea cannot be private property. No single nation can own the ocean.
But why the distinction? Why can I put a flag in a field and own it, but I can't claim a patch of the Atlantic?
He gives 2 main reasons. First, because it cannot physically be bounded or occupied.
You can't put a fence around the ocean.
Exactly. It's fluid. It's constantly moving. It's physically impossible to firmly sit in the seat of the ocean in a permanent way.
Okay. And the second reason?
Second, because it is inexhaustible. If I fish in the ocean, or if I sail my trade ship across it, I am not fundamentally preventing you from doing the exact same thing tomorrow.
It's big enough for everyone.
It is sufficient for everyone's use without being used up. Therefore, by natural law, it must remain common property.
We really have to remember the historical context here, too. Right?
Absolutely.
Grotius was a Dutchman. And at this time, the Portuguese and the Spanish empires were literally claiming that they owned the exclusive trade routes to India across the oceans.
They claimed legal monopoly over the water itself.
So Grotius was basically acting as the world's most overqualified corporate lawyer for the Dutch East India Company.
Yeah.
He's standing up and saying, no, legally, you actually don't own that water.
That's exactly what he was doing. He was providing the airtight legal cover for free trade.
But there is another aspect of his property theory that I find even more fascinating than the ocean stuff. It's this concept called the right of necessity.
Ah, yes. This is a brilliant loophole.
This is the part of the text that really feels like Les Miserables to me.
It is completely the Jean Valjean moment.
Explain how it works.
Grotius argues that in moments of absolute extreme distress, for example, genuine starvation, the original common right of humanity, actually revives.
Revives, meaning it overwrites private property.
Yes. If you are literally starving to death and I have a locked barn full of a surplus of bread under natural law, that bread is legally yours to take.
Wait, so he's saying theft becomes legal?
In that one specific extreme instance, yes. His logical reasoning is that the entire institution of private property was created to organize society and keep peace. It was never meant to kill people.
Right.
So if the strict rules of property are directly causing someone to die of hunger, those rules are temporarily suspended. Life supersedes ownership.
That is profound. He literally puts human life above the concept of property.
He does. But, and this is a big but, there is a strict caveat.
You can't just go around taking stuff forever.
No. You must still try to get permission first, if possible. And this is key. You must make restitution later.
Where you have to pay it back.
You have to pay them back when you are no longer starving and have the means. It's not legally considered robbery. It's considered a forced loan for the sake of survival.
A forced loan for survival. That is such a fascinating legal framework.
It really shows how deeply he thought about the edge cases of human suffering.
So we've established when you can fight. We've established who owns what. Now we get to the really messy part of the text, the fighting itself.
Yes, Justin in bello.
Conduct during war. Part 4. And this is where I feel like Grotius is walking an incredibly precarious tightrope.
He really is. And to navigate that tightrope, to try and bring order to a slaughterhouse, he creates this dual layer of law.
A dual layer.
This is crucial to understanding the entire text. He makes a hard distinction between what he calls external right and internal justice.
Okay, let's really break that down, because honestly, when I read this part of the text, I was a bit horrified.
It is very jarring for modern readers. Let's start with external right.
Okay.
This is basically what you can get away with legally among nations. It's entirely about impunity.
Impunity.
Yes. In war, according to the voluntary law of nations of his time, you technically can kill prisoners of war.
Right.
You can sack cities and burn them to the ground. You can enslave entire populations.
He actually explicitly says that it's legal to kill a prisoner who surrendered.
He says that if you do it, other nations will not treat you as a criminal or a pirate. You have the right to do it in a strictly political external sense. No international judge is going to put you on trial for it.
That sounds absolutely horrific. I mean, it goes against everything we just talked about with natural law.
It does sound horrific, but then he brings in the second layer.
Internal justice.
Internal justice or moral conscience. This is what you ought to do.
Okay.
Grotius says that while the external law of nations might grant you impunity, true justice and charity absolutely forbid killing the innocent.
There's a conflict between the two layers.
Yes. He says that a man might have a legal right to do something terrible, but if he actually exercises that right, he is a sinner in the eyes of God and nature.
So this is the fundamental difference between it's technically legal and it's actually right.
Precisely. And he spends hundreds of pages basically pleading with sovereigns to listen to that internal justice.
He's trying to guilt them into being human.
Basically, yes. He pleads for moderation. He says, sure, the law says you can burn that city to the ground, but should you, what does it actually achieve? He tries to shame the powerful into decency.
One specific, very grim reality of war that he addresses under this framework is slavery.
Yes.
And this is very hard for modern ears to hear, but we have to look at what the text actually says.
It is hard. Grotius openly admits that slavery is, quote, repugnant to nature.
Okay, so he acknowledges it's unnatural.
Yes. He says all humans are born fundamentally free under natural law, but he acknowledges that under the voluntary law of nations during war, it was allowed as a mercy.
A mercy. How on earth is slavery framed as a mercy?
You have to follow the brutal, cold logic of ancient warfare that he's analyzing.
Okay.
The logic was this: I have defeated you in battle. Therefore, under the rules of war, I have the absolute legal right to kill you right now.
Right.
However, instead of exercising my right to kill you, I will instead claim your labor and enslave you. Therefore, by making you a slave, your life is spared.
So the logic is literally better a slave than a corpse.
Exactly. It is a very grim calculus, but that was the prevailing legal reasoning he was trying to articulate. However, even within this dark topic, he brings up a fascinating mitigating concept called post-liminium.
Post-liminium. Okay, that sounds like a spell from Harry Potter.
It's a very old Roman legal concept. It translates roughly to the right of return, or crossing back over the threshold.
How does it work?
If a prisoner of war who has legally become a slave manages to escape and makes it back across the border into their own territory, they instantly regain all their former rights and property. Automatically. So if I'm captured, the enemy takes my house, my status, my freedom, but the second my foot crosses back over my home border, I get the house back. I get my citizenship back.
Wow.
Yes. Legally speaking, it's as if the entire period of captivity simply never happened. It restores the status quo ante.
That's a really interesting legal fiction to protect people who manage to survive.
Exactly. It's a mechanism of grace within a brutal system.
Okay, another major area of conduct during war that he dives deep into is deception.
Lying.
Lying in war.
Yeah.
I feel like all is fair in love and war is the standard cultural bumper sticker here. We just assume everybody lies during the war. Does Grotius agree with that?
Not entirely, and this is a very nuanced part of the text.
Yeah.
He makes a strict, critical distinction between stratagems and perfidy.
Stratagems versus perfidy, what is the difference?
A stratagem is a deception that is legally allowed.
Okay.
For example, setting up a physical ambush, or wearing camouflage, or even directly telling a lie to an enemy commander.
Wait, I can just lie.
Grotius argues that a lie is fundamentally a violation of the listener's right to the truth.
Right, normally lying is wrong.
But since active enemies in a state of war have forfeited their right to our confidence or our truth, we are allowed to lie to them.
Okay, so I can trick the enemy general. I can send a fake messenger saying, hey, I'm attacking from the north at dawn, when I'm actually attacking from the south at midnight.
Yes, that is a classic stratagem. It is perfectly legal under the rules of war, but perfidy is strictly, absolutely forbidden.
And perfidy is what?
Perfidy is breaking a promise or violating a sworn oath.
Why is that different than a lie? Aren't they both just deception?
It's a massive difference to Grotius, because faith, the ability to trust a promise, is the fundamental bond of human society.
A bond is society.
Think about it. If we cannot trust a sworn oath, like a white flag of surrender or a temporary truce to bury the dead, then there is absolutely no mechanism left to ever end the war.
Oh, wow. That is a really important point. If I can't trust your white flag, if I think it's just a stratagem, I just have to keep shooting.
Exactly. If you say truce and then wait for me to stand up and you open fire, you haven't just cleverly tricked an enemy.
You've broken the system.
You have destroyed the very mechanism of peace itself. You've burned the only bridge back to civilization.
It makes total sense.
Grotius is incredibly protective of this concept of faith between enemies. He says that even if you are dealing with a wicked tyrant or a literal pirate, if you freely give your word, you are absolutely bound by it.
Because if you aren't, then words mean nothing and war is eternal.
Precisely.
Which leads us nicely into part 5 of our deep dive, ending the war.
Because eventually the fighting does have to stop.
Right. And when it does, we get treaties, peace treaties. Grotius seems to be really almost obsessively focused on how we interpret the words in these treaties.
He is obsessed with it, and for very good reason. He recognizes that ambiguity in a treaty is the primary cause of the next war.
That's so true. You said you'd leave the valley? No, I said I'd leave the lower valley.
Exactly. So he provides a very strict set of rules for interpreting promises, and he categorizes promises into two types: favorable and odious.
Favorable and odious. What's the practical difference when reading a treaty?
A favorable promise is something that improves the human condition, like establishing peace, opening up commerce, or granting a reward.
Good things.
Good things. He says these favorable promises should always be interpreted broadly or extensively.
Give an example.
If the treaty says, we will have trade between our nations, Grotius says, You interpret that to imply as much trade as practically possible. You stretch it to its maximum positive benefit.
Okay. And odious promises.
Odious promises involve penalties, restrictions, or heavy burdens, like you must pay us 1,000,000 gold pieces in reparations, or you must dismantle your fortresses.
The punishments.
Right. He says these must be interpreted strictly and narrowly. If there is any wiggle room at all in the wording, you always give the benefit of the doubt to the person bearing the burden.
You don't stretch the punishment.
Never. So the benefit of the doubt always goes to the things that make life better, and you restrict the things that cause pain.
That's a very humane way to interpret law.
It is. And this whole legal structure leads to his ultimate crowning conclusion in the text, the intrinsic value of peace.
Right.
Grotius, after spending literally hundreds of pages outlining all the intricate legal ways you can theoretically fight a just war, basically turns around at the end and says, don't do it.
Really? After writing a 3-book manual on how to fight, the conclusion is just, never mind.
He concludes that even if you have a perfectly just cause, even if you have been wronged and have every legal right to attack, you should very often avoid war anyway for the sake of humanity.
Wow.
He quotes an old proverb in the text, half is better than the whole.
Meaning, compromise.
Yes. Take the settlement, take the bad deal. Because war is like a ship in a storm.
A ship in a storm.
It is so inherently dangerous, so wildly unpredictable that peace is always the safer bet, even for the stronger party.
Because even if you're strong, a stray cannonball can still sink you.
Exactly. He says you should never willingly steer your ship into the storm if you can possibly avoid it. He desperately wants these sovereigns to value human life more than their own political pride or even their own strict legal rights.
It's an incredibly powerful ending to a dense legal book. He builds this massive, imposing legal structure just to essentially stand in front of it and say, please, I beg you, don't use this unless you absolutely have to.
That's the perfect way to summarize it. He wants to firmly chain up the dogs of war, not give them a longer leash.
Okay, well, this brings us to one of my absolute favorite parts of the show.
I know where this is going.
We've looked at the text, we've analyzed the history, we understand the rules. Now, we are going to get a little bit weird.
Excellent.
It is time for our Thought Experiments segment.
I am ready. But first, disclaimer. The following scenarios are for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please do not try to annex a planet or start a cyber war based on our philosophical discussion today.
Thank you for the legal cover. Okay, scenario number 1. I call this the Martian real estate bubble.
I love it already. Go on.
Okay, so we're taking Grotius and we're applying him to the future. Imagine humans finally land on Mars. And a massive mega corporation, let's call them Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia. Got it.
They land, they plant a giant corporate flag in the red dirt, and they issue a press release saying, Mars is ours, the whole planet is private property.
Okay. So, based strictly on Grotius, we have to look at his definition of occupation.
Right, the theater seat.
Grotius argues that to legally own something, you must be able to bound and occupy it. You have to exert physical, tangible control over it.
Well, can you build a fence around a planet?
Not practically, no. But more importantly, we have to look at the ocean exception we talked about earlier.
Ah, right.
Remember, Grotius said the sea cannot be owned because it's too big to be exhausted by use and too big to be bounded. Space, logically, is the ultimate ocean.
So space is mare liberum, the free sea.
Spadium liberum, the free space. If Mars is treated like a massive new continent, maybe Mesopotamia can legally claim the specific patch of dirt that their base physically sits on because they are actively occupying that specific space.
Yeah, they're sitting in that specific theater seat.
Exactly. But they absolutely cannot claim the whole sphere. The rest of the planet, under natural law, remains common property for humanity.
Okay, here's the twist, though.
Lay on me.
Let's say a rival corporate ship arrives in orbit. They had a navigation error, they're completely out of fuel, and the crew is quite literally starving to death.
Okay.
Now, the Mesopotamia depot on the surface is fully automated and packed full of supplies. Can the starving rival ship just break in and take them?
Under Grotius's right of necessity, absolutely they can.
Really? Just break the locks?
Grotius would argue that the corporation's private property rights to that stored fuel and food are immediately temporarily suspended because the rival crew is in imminent danger of death.
The common right revives.
The common right revives. Their need to survive overwrites the property deed.
So they can land, break into the depot, take the protein packs and the fuel, and it's legally not considered space piracy.
It is not piracy. It is the exercise of natural law. However, remember the caveat.
Restitution.
Yes. Once they get safely back to Earth and they sell whatever cargo they had, they have to write a very large check to Mesopotamia for every single thing they took, probably plus the cost of the broken lock. Restitution is strictly required.
I feel like modern corporate lawyers would really hate Hugo Grotius.
They absolutely would. He fundamentally prioritizes human life over the corporate ledger.
Okay, scenario number 2. I call this one the AI truce paradox.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so imagine 2 super intelligent artificial intelligences are locked in a massive cyber war.
Okay.
They are hacking each other's mainframes, destroying data centers, absolute digital chaos.
The 30 Years' War, but with code.
Exactly. Now, AI1 decides to send a data packet directly to AI2, and the file is clearly labeled peacetreaty.xes.
A digital white flag.
Exactly. AI2 analyzes the situation, accepts the packet, and opens it to read the terms. But inside, it's not a treaty. It's a catastrophic virus that instantly wipes AI2's entire memory core.
Oh, the classic digital Trojan horse.
So, applying the rules of Grotius, the question is, was this a stratagem and allowed legal deception in war, or was it perfidy, illegal treachery?
Oh, this is a brilliantly tricky application of the text.
Right.
So we have to remember the rule. Stratagems are generally allowed. You can definitely deceive the enemy. But Grotius explicitly says that signs used for communication imply a pledge of safety.
A pledge of safety.
Yes. When you use specific language or symbols that universally invoke trust, like raising a white flag, or specifically using the words peace treaty, you are actively entering into a contract of faith.
So by explicitly labeling the file peace treaty, AI1 purposely invoked that right of faith.
Yes, exactly. Now, if the file had been labeled something mundane like system update or, I don't know, funny cat video.
And AI2 was dumb enough to click it.
Right, that might be considered a valid stratagem. You just tricked them into opening a malicious file.
A digital ambush.
Exactly. But by labeling it peace treaty, AI1 was perversely using the very mechanism designed to end war, to actually conduct the war.
And that's the line.
That is the line. That is pure perfidy.
Because if AI2 gets wiped out this way, no AI in the future will ever open a file labeled peace treaty again.
Exactly. The fundamental trust required to ever end a digital conflict is permanently destroyed. Grotius would say that AI1 didn't just win battle, it committed a profound crime against the digital law of nations.
It's honestly amazing how these concepts from a guy sitting in a room in 1625 map so perfectly onto things he couldn't even possibly dream of.
That is the absolute mark of a true classic. The underlying principles, necessity, faith, human survival, they are universal across time and technology.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for us sitting here today? We aren't 17th century kings leading armies, and hopefully we aren't fighting super intelligent AIs anytime soon.
Grotius left a truly massive legacy on the world. His work literally laid the intellectual foundation for the peace conferences at The Hague centuries later.
Really?
Yes. In fact, at one of those conferences, the United States representative actually laid a silver wreath on Grotius's grave. It was a formal acknowledgement by the modern world that this man, hiding in a book chest, built the intellectual framework for international law.
He looked at a world that believed might makes right, and he tried to throw that idea out the window.
He definitely tried. His enduring legacy is the radical idea that nations, no matter how powerful, are answerable to a power higher than the prerogatives of kings.
The law of nature and humanity.
Yes. He established intellectually that there is a moral fabric that holds the world together even when it is actively being torn apart by cannon fire.
Grotius suggests that force and law are not actually opposites, but that force must always be the servant of law.
And I think that leads perfectly to a final, slightly provocative thought for everyone listening.
Okay, let's hear it.
Grotius wrote this massive treatise in a time of absolute chaos, desperately trying to create order. Now look at our modern world. We have the United Nations, we have the Geneva Conventions, we have international courts. We basically have the exact system that Grotius dreamed of.
We built his machine.
We built it. But ask yourself this. Have we actually achieved his vision? Is force truly the servant of law today?
Or have we just created a much more complicated bureaucratic way for the strong to use the law as a tool against the weak.
That is the ultimate question. Are we actually following the internal justice of moral conscience that he begged us to use? Or are we just expertly managing the external right of impunity, finding legal loopholes to do whatever we want?
It's a sobering question.
As Grotius points out in the text, time according to the memory of man is not 100 years. We are still very, very young in this grand experiment of civilization. We're still figuring it out.
Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for listening to Talk Treatises.